welcome to this third FSG and Information Technology Boardroom Briefing event. The first one was all about staying at home and staying safe on the internet. And we talked about phishing and smishing attacks and all sorts of gory details with respect to people working from home and how we could get caught up. The second one was an interesting walk into the future of blockchain. And that was a real eye-opener for all of us in terms of the technology. And it was spoken very much in layman's terms. And this one is, again, another board briefing. So it is a layman's entry into digital investigation, titled as, "What is the evidence and where is it?" So the speakers this afternoon have more post-nominals to their names than I've had livery dinners. And I'm sure that they are going to educate, fascinate, and enthrall us with their subject matter. Our first speaker is Dr. Andrew Jones. Andy to his friends. I'm delighted, Andy, to welcome you. His speaker profile, which you've all seen in the invitation, was really long. It was so long, it was almost a thesis, actually. It took me a week to comprehend. But simply put, Andy holds a PhD in the area of threats to the information systems. He has had a distinguished career in the Army, in the British Army, and was a research analyst with a certain defense research establishment. He became principal lecturer in the University of South Wales, teaching network security and computer crime. All scary stuff. He holds various visiting posts now in Perth, Australia, at the University of Hertfordshire, which is actually my local university. I'll come and probably listen to you, Andy, very soon. The University of South Wales. And he has written several books, in fact, 7 books on the subject of information warfare, risk management, and cybercrime, and over 100 papers on the subject. We've challenged Andy to give us a quick overview on digital investigations. And I know it's a really complex subject and quite technical, but he's been challenged to speak in English. And for very few people, I guess, like me, can understand what he's saying because I know nothing on the subject. Andy, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. Okay, first of all, what is forensics? Because all digital investigations have an element. It's preserving, identifying, extracting, and documenting computer evidence. And the key bit is for use in a court of law. We use it for lots of other things, but it's got to be of a standard acceptable in a court of law. And it's the science of finding evidence from a whole range of resources. In fact, an ever-increasing range of resources. But just to give you some idea, the computer, the mobile phone, the server, or the network itself. Increasingly these days, you know, we talk about the Internet of Things, and that is one of the problem areas. So it's the use of science and technology for the investigation and establishment of facts or evidence in a court of law. Reliance there on facts. We have people who interpret the facts, but what you're trying to do is establish the facts. And I think it's worth saying there's realistically 4 types of digital investigation. There's digital forensics, data discovery, e-discovery, and then there's other types of investigations. If we look at digital forensics specifically, I'm not going to read through the list, but when I first started 20 odd years ago, it was fairly straightforward. It was basically dead disk forensics. That's forensics from disks, machines that have been turned off. And there was a whole process for making sure that you turned it off in a specific way to preserve as much evidence as possible. But increasingly that has grown, diversified, and now you need a whole range of skills, because each of the different areas listed here requires different tools, different skills, different knowledge bases. And what it does mean is that now you need a team of people to be able to be good at the totality, and you need to share with each other and complement each other, because an investigation won't be taken part in one space. It will be from several of the areas, and so you will need to work together with other people probably to establish the facts. Lots of different skill sets now required to be good at a forensic investigation. And I have to say, the CSI effect has had an impact, because now everybody thinks you can be an expert across all of it, and they also think that you can produce answers in an hour. And in the real world, that's a long way removed from that. But I'll go on. What sort of data is gathered by digital forensics? Well, obviously the files that are stored on whatever the device is, you know, the documents, the emails, the spreadsheets. But then there's a lot of other stuff, automatically stored data, your log files that say what's happened, files that have been purged from a server but where there's a copy still existing on the user's hard drive, deleted files. There's a common misconception that when you delete a file on your computer, it's gone. That's a very long way from the truth. People delete files and think that when they purge the recycle bin, it has gone away. It hasn't. It is still very recoverable. And unless you wipe your disk, wipe the space, it's very easy to recover it for the most part. And even then, it is still possible sometimes to recover file fragments, because if you've just deleted but it's been overwritten, it's possible that some of the file still exists and can be recovered. And the system data that gives you the electronic trail of all the activities that have been performed on the device or the network, depending on where you're looking. And that's held in a series of files that are automatically stored on the computer or the network. So it's not just about the files that you think are there. There's a lot more useful evidential information that can be there. And that can include things like GPS data, which is stored inside some files, very much so on mobile devices, but also on other devices. What do you use forensics for? It used to be thought of as a law enforcement thing, not for quite a while now, because commercial organizations increasingly need an understanding of forensics for things like intellectual property theft, industrial espionage, etc., etc., which may or may not be involve law enforcement, because risk says that you make a decision. In some cases you don't have a choice, but in some cases it may be decided that it will be handled internally because the exposure may be damaging, or because of a range of other reasons. So you've got to have an understanding within commercial organizations of how digital forensic can be used. Another form is data discovery. And this is very much a commercial thing, not a law enforcement thing. Data discovery is increasingly being used to make businesses more efficient. And it's by using advanced analytics and visualization tools to understand the data you hold within an organization and make best use of it. Because you may hold a whole range of data on different aspects of your business, but they tend to be held in silos. And it's only when you start to do data discovery and look at the impact that these individual silos of data have on each other that you may discover better ways to do business, how to gain competitive edge, how to meet your business goals, etc., etc. And let's say in an organization, everybody needs a way to read, understand, and glean value from the information that's available. And this is where the data discovery analytic tools and visualization tools come in. Normally, it's addressed in three ways: data preparation, your visual analytics, and then your advanced analytics. And depending on what your role is within an organization, you can be presented with different views of the data to help you be better at what you do. One of the interesting things with data discovery is the advent of GDPR, which we are still bound by, even though we've left the EU. But you're now legally responsible for protecting data in a whole new way. And the only way you can effectively protect it is when you understand what data you've got and where it is on your systems. There is a common factor, and that is data dissipation. Companies believe that they hold all of their sensitive information in certain areas and that they can see who's got access to it, etc., etc., which is very good. But data tends to move and migrate. People will copy files and hold it locally. People will share data that the system doesn't detect. And so data discovery helps you understand and helps you manage your risk of where the data actually resides. And this could be across the whole environment. And it saves manually trying to find specific items of data that you've got to be accountable for. Okay, it can help you discover long lost data, stuff you'd forgotten you'd got or didn't know where you'd got it anymore because of perhaps staff movement or perhaps business migration. It helps you identify your important data, find out where it's stored, and when you've done that, you can start to enhance the protection for the key elements of it. It also lets you see who has access to the data and hopefully to control user access rights. That in itself is a whole minefield. Another aspect is e-discovery or electronic disclosure. And this is the process of, when we say securing, we mean making sure it doesn't disappear, searching, locating, organizing electronic data. And this includes the unstructured data, such as emails, spreadsheets, documents, etc., chat logs. And the reason normally used for this is for the use by lawyers and solicitors, fact finders, etc., auditors, and it's normally used most commonly when you have takeovers, mergers, or demergers to understand what the organization knows or doesn't know And I'll come on a little bit to some of the issues with it. Other types, digital image forensics. If you want to authenticate a photographic image, you can do this. I mentioned earlier that there is data such as GPS coordinates. This is held in a thing called metadata, which is stored in a lot of files, particularly images. It will tell you probably the camera it was taken on, the time it was taken, the resolution of the lens, but also the location in many cases. Not automatic, but it's an option. You've got digital video audio forensics, and this is looking primarily at things like CCTV to determine whether it's authentic, whether it's original, and whether it's been tampered with. Because it used to be that a picture was worth 1,000 words. Sadly, no longer true, because increasingly proving that a picture is an actual authentic original is increasingly difficult. New fields that are coming in, drone forensics. Drones store an awful lot of data, as well as they store all of their flight data. They also store the video, etc., that they've been used to take, and launch point, landing point, and lots of other data. So they can be, the data that's on a drone can be used to recreate the flight of the drone, and also to match it to the content. I mentioned earlier as well, IoT devices, Internet of Things, I should have said, not IoT. And this is the smart things that are now increasingly in everybody's car, home, and every environment, from smart buildings, smart cities, which allow you to control an environment or monitor an environment from either within or without. There's lots of issues related to this because of the lack of standardization, and the other issue is lack of security around these devices themselves. So making sure that what you get is correct and accurate is incredibly difficult. What's the difference between computer forensics and e-discovery? They're both involved with electronically stored information, and a lot of people think they're the same thing. They're not. The primary purpose of e-discovery is to collect active data and metadata from hard disks and other sorts of information, but it's limited. Computer forensics is used to perform a much more in-depth recovery. It not only does what e-discovery does, but it looks for hidden data and also for things like the log files and the network data. All of this requires specialized training, and as I alluded to earlier, that's becoming increasingly complex because the cost, the breadth and depth of what's required is becoming increasingly difficult for organizations to manage. So you now have to look at teams of people to be good at the whole range. The other thing that's happening is we used to talk about computer crime, and we still do, but now almost every crime that takes place will have a computer forensic element, and that's because bad guys, carry mobile phones, they use sat-nav systems, and we have CCTV and other sources of information. And forensics is also being used increasingly in civil litigation, mostly divorces, and white-collar crimes. So the range of uses of it is increasing. The range of devices that it's being done on is increasing. It's getting much more difficult. Oh, and just as an aside, you know, the storage space that we have to look at is massively increasing. There's an old concept of Moore's law, and that is, you know, processing power increases over time, as does storage. So the time it takes you to investigate and to collect evidence from a large computer disk compared to the ones we used to have 10 years ago is, I won't say exponentially larger, but it is significantly longer. And you have to make decisions because it is no longer the old adage that you'd look at everything. Now you have to triage and start to look at what is relevant. Some of the challenges facing e-discovery: large volumes of data. You've got to decide what it is you're looking for and pursue it. Because that takes a lot of time, it's expensive. You need highly trained people, you need specific tools that are incredibly expensive, and it's a complicated process. If you're dealing with a fraud or a long history of conversations between people, it can be significant, the level of processing that needs, analysis and processing that needs to be done. To give you an example, a 10 terabyte disk will take about 4 days just to create an image of it, just to do the gathering and protecting it. And that's before you start doing anything else. And then everything else you do subsequently takes quite a lot longer. We now have cloud computing. A lot of people have gone over to the cloud, AWS typically, and there's all sorts of issues there. Who owns it? Who's got access to it? Where's it stored? What formats it's stored in? Is it possible to get an image of it? So I'm just trying to say it's getting increasingly expensive and difficult. Thank you. I think I've probably blinded you with science there, but I just wanted to skip through all of the different aspects and lay the ground for the next speaker.
Andy, thank you for that. I think you've laid the ground pretty well for the next speaker. I mean, we will take questions at the end, Andy, if that's okay, but I was very interested to listen to you speak and also talk quite eloquently about advanced analytic and visualization tools, which I understand in my own business, and data discovery, which is so very important. You also touched on a little bit on data literacy, which is a topic of its own self. Once we get to the data, how can we look at it, argue with it, analyze it, and do things with it? Something that is not in any syllabus in schools these days yet. Anyway, our next speaker, Dr. Jan Colley. Jan read a PhD in at the School of Applied Sciences at the University of South Wales. She is a digital forensic and cybercrime specialist. She's worked in the consulting field and is an expert witness and is in general practice. Her expertise are forensics, IP theft, cybersecurity, and forensics of mobile, computer, and tablet devices. She's also a specialist in cloud services and including social media. Jan's going to build on what Andy just presented and talk about forensic readiness in business. What is digital evidence? Where is it? How can you get to it? And what does it look like? So, Jan, over to you.
These are some of the things that I get involved in, just so that when I say I get involved in, I mean as a digital forensic analyst, not personally, you understand. Anyway, so as you can see, it's a whole range of stuff that digital forensics is now used for. What I'm going to talk about is actually, it covers a lot of things that Andy's already spoken about, but in a kind of more broad detail. And it's more about how digital evidence in the real world than it is about forensic readiness or anything of that nature, but we will get there. First thing I'd like to introduce you to is Gilb's first law. We love it in digital forensics because you can bet your life that if something's gone missing or if something's gone wrong, it's more than likely it's a human that's caused it. If you're interested in forensic readiness, incidentally, it usually, in my experience anyway, I know people argue about this, but the human is usually the weakest link. So you can build the biggest systems that you like to protect your data, and all it takes is one person to do something a bit silly or something that they didn't really think through, and that's your data open to the world. I'll get onto that in a moment. The basis of all forensic theory, including digital forensics, is called Lockhart's principle. Some of you probably have already heard of this, but the basic idea of it is that every contact leaves a trace. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat as well. So anybody coming into a scene of a crime or an incident leaves something behind, and everybody leaving the scene takes something out. So that's essentially what you're looking for. When you see these TV series and you see all these serious-looking detectives standing around a scene, and you know, these people going in with interesting-looking suitcases and all togged up in various interesting gear. What they're looking for, as you know, is DNA or fibers or things like that. It's no different with digital forensics. What we're looking for is digital artifacts. So not bits of clothing or bits of blood or bodily fluids or anything of that nature, but we are looking for any trace. And there is always a trace, and it doesn't matter what you do, there will always be a trace, which is lucky for us. It's just a matter of knowing where it is and how to find it. Obviously, in today's world, information is absolutely everywhere. Again, Andy's already gone over quite a bit of this, but you notice I've stuck in the cell site there because obviously that's very pertinent to mobile phones, and in fact anything that is connected via GPRS. Because you can get an awful lot of data, a lot of location data, for instance, about where people were, where individual devices were, from cell data records, which you can get from the service providers. Obviously, you have to have a court order for that, or you have to have a special permission for that. The police can usually get that kind of permission. The idea is, what you've got to bear in mind, information everywhere, and I do mean everywhere, everything, that central picture there, obviously it's a brain. The idea is memory, anything that's got memory. And everything that you can think of now, all these little gadgets that you can see around your screen, they all have memory. I'm going to just concentrate a little bit further on these Internet of Things devices and wearable tech in particular, because I don't know about you, I'm a terminal gadget freak. So I have to have all the gear, the smart watches, the doodah, you know, the home tech and all that sort of thing. Most homes have these now. You've probably read quite a bit in the newspapers about what they can and can't pick up. Sometimes what they pick up is used by the police in criminal investigations. It's astonishing how much they will save. Your Alexa, for instance, will save quite a lot of conversations that you probably didn't want it to. But the frightening thing about IoT devices is if in corporations is if one creeps into your building, and people do bring their stuff in. They might have signed all sorts of disclaimers. I won't do this, and I won't do that, and I won't introduce things to the system. But they're quite likely to walk in with bits and pieces that they don't think count, but actually do count quite a lot. And one of the big problems is that security standards for IoT devices aren't as stringent as they are for other products, such as smartphones or laptops. So in many cases, it's been known for IoT manufacturers to ship highly insecure devices. And sometimes these products never receive any kind of patch either, because the user isn't aware how to apply it, or the company that is to say the manufacturer, never issues one. And a large number of connected devices are also very easily discoverable. There's a search engine for IoT devices called Shodan, and that's quite scary what that will show you on your network. So not only does this leave IoT products potentially vulnerable to being compromised and roped into something called a botnet, that's where lots of computers get together to blitz your system, but IoT devices connected to corporate networks could enable attackers to use something as trivial as a fitness tracker or a smartwatch, or in one case that we covered, a smart kettle. Absolutely true. The smart kettle is actually keeping the network password in the clear. That's been stopped now. That particular one's moved on and it's had a patch. But it just shows you, as things come to the market, you don't know who's brought it to the market and whether they've checked all this stuff. In the last literature that I looked at, almost half of organisations have discovered what's known as a shadow IoT device on their network during the past year. So that's quite scary, just something food for thought there. More places where information is going to be. Again, you know quite a lot of this, but it's surprising when you think about cloud, you're probably thinking about places in the cloud where your corporate data is. But of course, your users have things like Facebook, Twitter. They might be using all sorts of things like Match and Tinder. They're using note software like Evernote and so forth. So do you really know where all your data is? I have been called in to examine where corporate IP went to, and whole manuals have been put onto Dropbox and then shuffled off, or been disappeared, not via email, but by various other methodologies. So it's very hard to keep track of where all this stuff is. There are official ones and the unofficial ones. So obviously from the corporate point of view, you're looking at financial fraud, IP theft, digital document fraud. But from a social media point of view, you've got all these chat apps, dating sites, photo sharing, and as Andy was also saying, can you get this data? Can you go in and get it? Probably not, because you need special permissions for that. You might need a court order for some of these US services. Do you know who to write to? Will they play ball with you? Hotmail and people like that I tend to ignore even British lawyers writing to them and saying, actually, we need a permission to get. Can you give us the owners of this particular email address, or who's using this particular service? And also, if you're doing it from a corporate point of view, don't forget you're not law enforcement, so you should not go there if it's private to somebody. If you're looking at somebody's Facebook account, for instance, it's all right if they've shared things publicly. If they've shared things between their friends, that's now private, and you can't stray from the public to the private, because you're going to be breaking all sorts of laws. Now, I put this, that's okay, I'll delete it, because I was talking where that slide was meant to come was after that, was after all the digital footprints, where are they? And lots of people think, well, it's okay, I'll just rub it out, I'll just delete it off my system. I'll cover it with noughts and zeros. There's this stuff that you can get out on the internet. You can get overwriting software that will blitz a file with noughts and zeros. But believe me, particularly on a Windows computer, there are going to be other traces, and people like me are going to know how to find those. So quite likely we'll be able to find out not only you deleted it, when you deleted it, and what app you used to delete it. So that's always quite fun. I put this slide in. I hope you can see it reasonably clearly. This is what a forensic analyst the type of thing forensic analysts will do when they're looking at the digital data. You can probably see in that top screen on the right there a little cross through a little like document shaped thing, and it's got ecrit.txt. That actually was originally called secret.txt. And this is just an example that particular file has been deleted. But this just shows you that it doesn't matter if it's been deleted. When the analyst looks at the digital data, this is how it's going to come back to them, thanks to the digital software. So the stages of digital forensics, Andy's already gone over. This is to identify, preserve, recover, and present the evidence. Now, preserving the evidence is a big one. We'll move on to that in a second, because you've got to ask yourself, how long is your evidence going to be there? Recovering it is quite a difficulty, not just because of the amount of data, but can you get it back in a forensically sound way? Can you get it back in a format that you can read? The presentation element is presenting it to a court of law, because when you're getting digital evidence, or if you're looking to make a case out of this, it'd better be absolutely pristine, because if it isn't, you're never going to be able to present it in any kind of court of law, either criminal or corporate. So now, good news about digital evidence is this, and the bad news is this. The extremely fragile is a very important one, because just moving your mouse causes lots and lots of files to change. Now, it's not going to change the file that says it was me what done it, governor, with the lead piping in the library. However, it is going to change stuff. So if you get somebody like me on the other side of your court case, and I found that your IT people have had a nice rummage around before they called in the digital forensics people, I'm going to get that evidence rendered as inadmissible to court, because I'll say, well, you've done this, you've done that, you've done the other. I've got a good example of that a bit later on, if I get that far. Somebody's going to have to flag me, incidentally, because I was timing myself, but my timer has decided not to work very well for me.
Carry on, Jan. You got about 5 minutes to go. Right.
Okay. So I better speed up then. So the first basis that you've got to cover is where is your stuff? So where's your data? How's it stored? How long will it be there? Classically, things like server files can be there overwritten very quickly. This we've already covered. What's it mean is quite interesting, because what it means is a question of interpretation, for which you need to have the right skill set. What it looks like may be not what it actually means. And I've got a slide on that if I can get to it quickly enough. I'm going to talk a little bit about evidential value, because a lot of people think, particularly, excuse me to the lawyers in the audience, but lawyers quite often send me paper printouts and screenshots, and they ping me emails and email trails and things like that, say, there you are, there's your evidence. I'm afraid to say none of those things are digital evidence. They're just bits of paper, they're just screenshots. When people like me come in to have a look at what's happened on the system, we need the actual digital file, the original one, not a copy of it, but an actual original one that came off the actual machine or digital device that it was made on. So bear that in mind. You need to preserve the actual original device intact, not been messed with in any way, shape or form. Reason for that is that digital evidence can easily compromised, and it's easily overwritten. And going back on what I said before, if anybody's had a nice foodle around at it before the digital person comes along to do the forensic download, you're likely not to be able to use that evidence in court if you ever needed to. I was going to go through this, but I'm going to whiz through this. I'm going to put up principle 2 quickly. The thing called the ACPO guidelines, which everybody adheres to. It's not law, but they are guidelines. Law enforcement, so the police adhere to these guidelines, and so does everybody in the digital forensics world. Principle 2 is interesting, draw your attention to that. So if you do need to access a system, at least have it accessed by somebody who knows what they're doing, and so that they can explain, if necessary, if it's, oh, well, we haven't got that because we had to we haven't got the RAM, for instance, we haven't got any memory for you to look at because we had to pull the plug to stop this incident happening, then the person who did that has got to be able to explain why they did it and how they did it. And quite frequently, as long as the explanation is a good one, you'll get that through. So these are my cheap and cheerful guidelines, which I'm just going to whiz through because I know I've not got much time left. This document as much as possible is really, really important. So if you ever have an incident, very first thing you must do is write everything down, document everything, photograph things if necessary. You know, photograph the scene. It's this server, it's this laptop, it's this mobile phone. Just photograph it as you see it before anybody touches it. Write it down, dates, times, all of that. You're going to be is going to help your digital forensic analyst down the line. It'll help you make your case after the event. All the other things are just bog standard, what not to do if you've got a piece, something like a mobile phone or a laptop, and you think there's an incident happening. Best thing to do is leave it alone, preserve it as best you can, keep it away from everybody, and get in somebody who knows how to make a digital forensically sound download. Oh, let's just whiz on that. Oh, yeah. This is a bit more on how things look. That's what obviously messages look like on your mobile phone. And this is what happens if you feed it into forensic software. So when you get a forensic download, we will get something as clear as this from the forensic software. So you'll see there's all these chats and messages and so forth, but it'll show you how many have been deleted. So it's quite clever software. And when you actually dig down, obviously I've taken bits out to protect the not very innocent here, because these are actuals from a case. This is a sort of detail it goes down to. It gives you, the last activity, it gives you the participants, gives you the actual text message. You're going to drop that 100 to me on Sunday then, etc., etc. So that it's a huge amount of information that we're going to be able to drag back, even if those messages have been deleted. I put an innocent example of web browsing here, because most of my examples contain a load of filth, unfortunately, because that's what you get to look at. This is a fairly innocent one, but you'll see that all the search terms have come back. If you look to the third column to the right, all the search terms that this particular individual has used, complete with their misspellings, have come home to roost. So we can see what they've been up to and where they've been. Another quick one this is on interpretation. If you look at this, if you go along from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, on the 6th column along, what does it mean? If you see that, it says Chrome synced data. So this was from a real investigation, this data. And what happened was the police officer in charge, there was some nasty browsing going on, indicative of what they were going to charge this individual of, which was not a very nice offence. And they said, oh, look, there's all these pornography sites and so forth. And we can tell because it's all here. We've got all this web browsing back. However, this column here tells me that that is synchronized data. So essentially that was stuff that was on his mobile phone, but it might have been done on an iPad, or it might have been done on a computer. It just had to be part it was part of the same group. So maybe it was a family member or somebody else who had their hands on his system. But the point from an evidential point of view was, no, this isn't evidence that that individual has done anything, because that wasn't on the phone. It's been synced over to the phone. So another thing to think about, when you think about what I'm doing, how safe I am, what I'm doing in my environment, what your kids might be doing, or what your employees might be doing, they don't think about how information, how data is streamed across all these devices, which can be quite frightening.
Well, Jan, you gave us a really good flavor of digital forensics with real-world examples. You brought the whole subject to life, which was very, very good. And thank you, particularly for your tips and guidelines. Very interested in all those search criteria and the interpretation bits at the end. Very, 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 very nice. Right. Okay. We have 5 or 6 minutes left. We're going to go to Q&A, if that's okay. We will also be joined by Roy Isbell. Most of you know Roy. Roy is a principal fellow at Warwick University. He's a businessman, academic. He's got 30 years experience in comms and cyber and all those related fields. What he doesn't know about cybercrime is not worth knowing, I'm told by him. Roy is a court liveryman and the chair of the security panel at the and he is the person who's organized the speakers, and thank you, Roy, for that. First question comes from Ian Mitchell. Ian's not actually sort of asked us of any particular panelists, but I'll just open it out to all. What is the present state of the art with respect to the use of AI to carry out e-disclosure, and do they work satisfactorily?
Silence. Okay, so maybe I'll just jump in there. I think we have to be careful with what we mean by AI and its difference between AI and big data analytics. So big data analytics is actually quite far advanced in the investigations world. I think you'll find the problem with artificial intelligence is that it makes a lot of decisions based on mathematical formulas, and there's a number of different AI formulas that can be applied. So it depends on whether you're talking about true AI, true artificial intelligence, machine learning, or whether you're actually talking about big data analytics. And I think in this case, because of the evidential nature of digital investigations, then big data analytics is probably more applicable. Andy, do you want to follow up on that?
Just to add in, Ian is saying that he does really mean AI.
Yeah, okay. So he doesn't want to go down the big data analytics route. In my experience, and what I would say is that from my knowledge, I'm not as great on digital forensics as obviously our two speakers. I'm more of the publisher of the Digital Forensics magazine, and get to read an awful lot of articles around digital forensics. And what I will say is that I'm not yet seeing too many articles coming through on AI use in digital forensics, but I'll hand over to the experts who can probably give us a little bit better view on that.
I'll pick up if you like. Not massively used in digital forensics, and that's because there is such a range of types of situations and cases that you're looking at, and they tend to be sized. You may be looking at one organization, or you might be looking at one computer. So very difficult to get effective and useful AI that I would trust.
If I may add, one of the problems with AI, or one of the worries with AI in standing it up for this kind of usage, is that AI is obviously programmed by a human being, and there's always the question of, has some kind of bias crept in? Yep. Either in the programming inadvertently, I'm not saying it's deliberate, or from the data sets that you're training your AI on, that it's just learned the same thing over and over and over and over, so it only looks for this type of face, for instance, in facial recognition.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers your question. Okay, the other, Ian Mitchell again has asked a follow-up question. The law has the best evidence rule. It follows that any copy in any form is not the best evidence compared to the original. And in any event, the metadata cannot be captured by making a paper copy of the plain data.
Well, obviously not a paper copy. That was part of what I was saying. That's why it's not. That's not forensically sound. That is not digital evidence. A paper copy. What you, as I said before, what you need is the actual device upon which the alleged thing happened, and then you can look at not only, let's say, your document that you're worried about, or whatever it is that you're worried about, but you can take a holistic view, because you can see what other things were happening on that device or on that network at that same time. So you can take a view as to what was actually happening and who caused, or who or what caused it.
Yeah, just to clarify on what Jan's saying there, when you do a forensic investigation, the first thing you do is actually take a copy, a bit by bit copy, that is an exact copy of the original. You then store the original and do all of your analysis and your research on the copy that you've made. In fact, you normally make two copies, because then you can always, if you're ever questioned, if it's ever checked, you can go back to the original and give someone else a copy of that original. And without getting technical, it is provably exactly the same data, exactly the same number of bits in the same order that was on the original. And that's the forensic soundness, the scientific soundness of making that image.
Yes, it's a principle of all forensics that any examination by one forensic bod, doesn't matter whether it's a pathologist or somebody like myself, has got to be verifiable and repeatable.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to be moving to the next question, please, if I may. Martin Hawley. Regarding the wiping of disks, what is happening with disk storage that fragments remain, and how large are these fragments?
I'll pick that up if you like in the first one. Disks, different types of disks, different types of storage media store stuff differently. At the moment, we're moving to solid state storage, and there is no tool that the government will accept as being able to be verified as having overwritten every and wiped every sector of that disk. How much, if, never mind wiping, but if stuff's just been deleted and overwritten, how much is likely to remain? Totally dependent on the storage system, the operating system, and the size of the blocks that are used for storage. But typically it will be either most of or part of a document or an image or a file. It is when the next thing uses the same bit of storage, it's the bit that's left after the end of file marker.
Thank you.
The other thing to remember is that every time you create something like a document, for instance, a Word document, I quite often say this in my talks, you haven't just made one copy and you haven't just made 2 copies, you haven't just made 3 copies. You've probably made something like 15 copies in various formats, in various ways, shapes and forms on that particular computer. So you might think you can go in there and blitz it, but the chances of you getting all of it is not large.
Thank you. One last question before I bring the master in. Does DLT, hashing, etc., play a role in preserving data?
Absolutely. Andy, you can let me do that.
It's come back to, you know, I was trying to avoid hash algorithms, but
Yeah.
It's one of the tools that we use in forensics is SHA-5 and MD5 and SHA algorithms to verify that what we have is an exact copy of the original, and it is at the file level, at the storage medium level. It varies depending on what you're trying to prove.
It's a subject and it's all right.
Absolutely.
What we tried to do this evening was actually give a reasonable overview, and I think the guys have done that because it's a very, very technical subject, and trying to put it into sort of a more of a layman speak is very, very difficult. And my hat's off to the 2 speakers for rising to the challenge. Well done, guys.
I've just noticed on the chat there's one more thing come up. Yeah, surely we do use MD5 still these days.
Still, yes. Although not much usually. Usually use the alternative SHA-1 and so forth, but they haven't invented anything better. So, and the chances of cracking it, I mean, okay, academically, if you want to carry out an academic experiment and blitz it to death, you probably can. But in the real world, I don't know what you think, Andy, but unlikely that it's going to be a problem.
It's better than DNA. The likelihood of a collision is lower.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. The time is running out. The master is in the house, so we are going to pass over to him. Looking smart as ever, Mark. Over to you for your last final concluding words.
Well, Jan, Andy, Gus, Roy, thank you very much. I'm certainly wiser. I'm not sure if I heard at the end something about BLT. The only thing I know is a BLT is what I buy in Starbucks or wherever. But I think it's probably something else. Anyway, thank you very much. I have to say I'm more illuminated than I certainly was at the beginning. And I used to work for a commercial insurance company, which is one of the largest, probably buyers of litigation services, particularly in the shipping area. So discovery is, and e-discovery is an interesting subject. Plus, I think that data mining is also quite an interesting subject because we have, or certainly when I was there, had lots of information which we could usefully have mined had we been able to do it. So thank you everybody for making it a very interesting evening.
And thank you, Jan. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Roy, for organizing it. Master, thank you. Lovely to see you all, and look forward to seeing you all again very soon.